Hi and welcome to our weekly book chat. Now I'm a little bit anxious about this because I know some people might have a sort of negative reaction to this book, Diana Closely Guarded Secret, Inspector Ken Wharfe. Now, the reason why I think there might be a negative reaction is because I've actually had a negative reaction prior to reading it, because it was actually written with Robert Jobson, and I'm not a huge Robert Jobson fan, but I've got to say, now I've read this book, I wish I had read it earlier. You can't hear Robert Jobson's voice in this. You can hear Ken Wharfe's searingly honest, heartfelt story. Gee, this moved me. It really did. And you can sort of see the progression a little bit in Housekeeper's Diary. You can see the progression from sort of Diana unraveling and the marriage getting worse and worse and worse, and Charles getting more distant and standoffish, and the whole thing just going so pear-shaped, and so many people in pain, and the devastation and the impact on the staff and the kids and everyone around. And similar thing to Ken Wharfe's observations. Initially he saw their marriage start to fall apart, but he also is very clear that they both had agreed to affairs, that it was really, really, really obvious that Charles was with Camilla and Diana was with James Hewitt, and Charles gave her space to have an affair, a serious affair over a few years, with James Hewitt actually getting to go with her to Highgrove. And they would sort of have a weekend on, weekend off, where Charles would be with Camilla and then she'd be with James Hewitt. So evidently it was quite a shock when she turned it around in that Bashir interview, as if she was sort of the hardly done by, cheated on woman, because that really wasn't the case. It was sort of very much an agreement. Anyway, whether Diana had that much say in it initially, I don't know. But, this isn't about the blame game. This is about juicy stories. And, there are some juicy stories in this book. So let's get on. Really, really juicy. You're really going to enjoy this. Look at all my bookmarks. Look at them all. I've got all the juice for you. I picked out all the best bits. So, Diana, Closely Guarded Secret. And anyway, I'll shut up. I'll just get on with it, okay? I'll just get on with it. So he was saying how no one could have failed. This is in the prelude to the book. No one could have failed to appreciate the bitter irony of the day of Diana's funeral. For years, I'd been responsible for guarding this woman with my life if necessary. Now I was in charge of the police security operation for my department at her funeral. That life had been snuffed out in a combination of high spirits, stupidity, and human error. That her death was avoidable made me angry. Yet the whole sorry episode had numbed me inside, as it had most of the rest of the world. All I could think was, what a waste. What a waste. And indeed, from his perspective, it was a waste, because he could see all of that sort of almost being foretold. When he left her employ, they were barely speaking. And like I said, he saw her really unraveling at that point. And he just had this feeling that, real feeling of foreboding that it just was not going well, and that she probably wouldn't be looked after very well from that point. He certainly was very dedicated. My department had the care of her for some 15 years. Mohammed Fayyad's team of bodyguards, and that's in quotation marks, had her charge of her security for 8 weeks, and now she was dead. They had failed in their task, and it angered me beyond words. So that's in the prelude. But now we're going to go back in time when he first went to work for Diana and Charles. Now, initially, he was hired to be the bodyguard of Prince William and Prince Harry, the little Prince William and the little Prince Harry. And he used to take William off to Weatherby School every day. And then later on, he became the bodyguard of Princess Diana. For nearly 6 years, from 1988 to 1993, I shadowed the late princess in my capacity as her Scotland Yard personal protection officer, or in layman's terms, her police bodyguard, during the most traumatic period of her life, For most of the time, she was a joy to work with. And he does really sort of convey that joy of working with her. There was a lot of fun times. There was a lot of times where her sense of humour and her joy for life and her passion for her work shone through. And he really did admire her very, very much. It seems to be that a lot of men that were in Diana's orbit just fell that little bit in love with her. I'm not sure that Ken Wharfe really did fall in love with her. I just think that he had a genuine affection for her and the desire to protect her, which is very good if you're a police bodyguard, to have a desire to protect your principal. So he says that initially he was a member of the elite Royal Protection Department charged with guarding the heir and the spare, there's that phrase again, to the British throne. And he talks about the day where he actually went to meet Diana for the first time, and he met her in the front of Highgrove, and she, he got the job and it was all a pleasant meeting. And as he was walking off, she said, "I don't envy you your job, Ken." After Colin had told her that I'd been appointed to head up the security for her two sons. "They can be quite a handful, but remember, I'm always around if you need me," she added reassuringly. And he would have needed reassurance, because when you hear the way William and Harry were with him, oh my goodness me. He enjoyed it though. He really enjoyed it, and but they used to love a bit of rough and tumble anyway. I won't go ahead too much because I'm sure I bookmarked a bit of that anyway. In the early days, I had a fairly regular routine. On weekdays, I would accompany William to Wetherby Prep School in Notting Hill, a short distance from Kensington Palace, where I would spend the day until it was time for him to go home, and at weekends would look after both princes' security, usually at one of the royal residences, on a rota basis. Now, he says a really interesting thing about Nanny Barbara Barnes. Diana had a very clear idea how she wanted her sons raised. She'd already asked their first nanny, Barbara Barnes. Now, Barbara Barnes used to say that it was important that the princes were treated differently because William had a different role. But this fell on deaf ears with the princess, and I'm wondering if they had gone with Barbara Barnes' idea, whether Harry wouldn't have turned out to be so insufferable. Although I liked Barbara and believed that she had William and Harry's best interests at heart, I felt Diana was right to try to raise her sons as normally as possible. Well, look how that turned out. Moreover, despite their birthright and largely thanks to their mother, they've developed into remarkably balanced young men. Well, one of them did. And I think I'll pay tribute to Catherine for that, and Catherine's family. They, the fact that William is so balanced now and turned out so well, I give full credit to the Middletons for that. On one occasion, after I'd become the princess's protection officer, Harry arrived unannounced in my room. Can I use the radio? I just want to see how it works," he said. Harry was, and still is, an endearing character. Ugh. And I relented, handing him a police radio and showed him how to use it. Then I gave him specific instructions to go to several designated points and check in using the radio. He was ecstatic. So we agreed that he would visit Lady Jane, Diana's sister, in the stable block, a short distance from Kensington Palace, and then with CCTV coverage, I spoke with Lady Jane, who confirmed that he had arrived. Soon after, Lady Jane rang me to say that Harry was on his way back. I informed the police at the barrier. Harry didn't show. Growing anxious, I contacted the police box. The officer on duty told me he'd not seen Harry. Faced with a potential security disaster of my own making, I was about to send out a search party when Harry radioed in. "Harry, can you hear me? Where the hell are you?" I said as calmly as possible, desperately trying to appear untroubled by his disappearing act. "Ken, I'm at Tower Records in the High Street," he explained. Oh, God. He'd left the palace grounds and had walked east along Kensington High Street. Thank heavens the radio had the range to transmit over this extra distance. So he ended up safely back. And Ken Wharfe actually didn't tell anyone in the palace, didn't tell anyone at all, because he knew that he would be in a lot of trouble And that was probably wise. But yeah, terrifying, terrifying. Now, there was a really disturbing story that really upset me about King Charles's little dog Tigger walking into the kitchen, and Diana was having a bottle of wine with Mervyn, the chef, who sounds like a vindictive, horrible person. I'm sorry, Mervyn, if you're watching this, but you really do sound awful, because he didn't like Tigger the dog going into the kitchen, and so he put him in the oven, not on, the oven was off, but it had been on. So it was too warm for the dog, and the dog was frantically trying to get out. And then Prince Charles came into the kitchen and said, "Have you seen Tigger? Have you seen Tigger?" And Diana didn't say where the dog was. Ken Wharfe was there. He didn't say where the dog was. And Mervyn didn't say where the dog was. And then they let the dog out, and Tigger ran after King Charles, who'd gone out into the garden yelling out his name. Oh my goodness me, what horrible people, how disgusting. And Ken Wharfe says, he was a bit dazed and hot. Oh my goodness me, I bet his paws were, oh gosh, isn't that just horrific? That made me really angry, and it made me dislike Diana even more at that point. Because she was sitting there and she didn't even say anything. What a horrible person. I can understand Ken Wharfe not saying anything because, it would put him right in it. And he had to sort of work with Mervyn and he had to work with Diana. But then I'm making excuses. But Diana had a responsibility to say about the dog, about Tigger. She hated Tigger. She hated Tigger. Within days of joining the Metropolitan Police Royal Protection Department, I became party to many of Diana's most intimate secrets, passed to me semi-officially. A handover was arranged in the kitchen at Highgrove, and nobody else was present except Chief Inspector Graham Smith, Diana's senior police protection officer, and I sat down and chatted over a cup of coffee. What he told me was no real surprise because there had been gossip that had been going around, and the principal subject of their conversation was Diana's love affair with Captain James Hewitt. Graham spelt out the situation calmly and clearly. The wife of the heir to the throne was having an affair with an officer of the household cavalry. And it was not for us as her police protection officers, or for me in particular, to moralise or even to have an opinion about it. So they didn't. And I think also that it wasn't up to the police protection officers to have an opinion about Prince Andrew's shenanigans either. While the prince and princess conducted their romances in private in their country home at Highgrove, he goes on to say that it became a battleground. It had gone from a calm private sanctuary of Charles's to an absolute marital battleground. I lost count of the number of times the prince arranged to meet his friends after promising a special dinner with Diana. Her reaction was understandable and often volatile. "Stuff your rotten friends, stuff them. They're not my friends," she would scream after he revealed that their private plans had been scrapped because he was entertaining some of his circle. Well, that seems a little cruel, doesn't it? But then after Tigger, no sympathy. Anyway, hate animal cruelty. The princess did bow to pressure and take her sons to the polo occasionally, because he was saying how Diana hated to go to the polo, that she found it really boring, and it was always part of the Highgrove sort of weekend. But then he said that she couldn't really win, because if she went to the polo, the press invariably would pay sort of too much attention to her, and she would end up on the front page of the newspaper, whereas Charles would act like she deliberately did that because he didn't get any attention for his actual polo playing. So he used to get a little bit jealous of that, and he used to sort of have a go at her for trying to attract attention. But she couldn't stop attracting attention. She only had to turn up, and the press, the paparazzi, would focus on her. And to be fair to her, she wouldn't call the paparazzi to go to the polo because they were there anyway. They were there anyway in the hope that she would turn up. And so they would always try to catch her out with Harry being naughty or some embarrassing thing happening, you know. So yes, in that situation, I do have sympathy. I don't think that she could have really, you know, helped but be on the front page, honestly. Now, he says about this time where she was actually helping with the AIDS charities, and she had a meeting with the late Queen, who, of course, was the Queen at the palace and at Buckingham Palace. And this is what he said. I once had to console the princess as she broke down in tears as we were driving back to Kensington Palace after a meeting with the Queen at Buckingham Palace. She was always very nervous of the Queen. At first she told me she'd been welcomed into the family and believed that Her Majesty was a great supporter of hers. For her part, the Queen knew that if handled with care, the young princess was a great asset to the royal family. But by the time I joined her team, the problems had been escalating, and Diana was seen as a problem, a very definite problem. And Prince Philip had stated his belief that she needed to be handled with care. Now, during this particular meeting about this AIDS charity, the Queen apparently had told Diana in no uncertain terms that although she admired her courage and conviction in confronting and publicising the AIDS issue, she thought her daughter-in-law was misguided. She said that she could be seen to be the champion of what was then regarded as a gay plague. And the Queen was sort of upset by the fact that Diana was focusing too much on it and ignoring her other charities. They weren't getting any time with Diana because she was so focused on the AIDS charity. Turns out it was lucky that she was focused on the AIDS charity, and I think really the Queen was wrong with this. But, you know, I guess she was sort of sprouting the prevailing narrative at the time. Everyone did indeed think that way. After her tense meeting with the Queen, Diana had emerged distraught into the palace forecourt where I was waiting with the car, and sobbing she blurted out to me, "The Queen does not approve of what I'm doing on AIDS, Ken." Then a familiar litany. She added furiously, "That bloody family, after all I've done for them, I just can't win. Everything I do is wrong." Well, I guess she could try to see it from their point of view, but she wasn't one to see things from her point of view. She wasn't asking her to give up the AIDS charity, honestly. She was just asking for her to focus on her other charities in equal measure. One of Diana's many qualities was that she was really a good girl at heart, a natural girl who liked taking care of others. Now, when you hear this story, you are going to be so incredibly gobsmacked. You will thank me for this incredibly, incredibly juicy story. Are you ready? Have you got your seatbelts on? This is a story and a half, and I've never heard it before. So she took no domestic staff with her when she went to visit her mother. It meant she could really be herself. Perhaps curiously, for a woman of immense privilege, she realised that domestic chores, well, the absence of them with over-attentive staff always waiting on her, she realised how much she delighted in them. I mean, it's all right if you don't have to do them all the time. She delighted in doing the dishes after dinner and in washing everybody's clothes. She even offered to iron my shirts, although I initially declined. Eventually, however, I relented and handed one over with her joking that I could not imagine the Queen ironing one of my colleagues' shirts. The image of Her Majesty standing at the ironing board with one of her shirtless bodyguards sent the princess into a fit of giggles. So he took the shirt off his back and handed it over to the princess, and he was shirtless. I'm shocked. I thought initially when I read it that he would just hand over a shirt from his bag, from his suitcase. No, he was standing there with it all hanging out. As she stood in the kitchen with just a towel wrapped around her, ironing my shirt, she was standing in the kitchen at the ironing board with the iron, ironing the shirtless bodyguard's shirt in a towel. She just got out of the shower. She was in a towel. Now, if that is not an intimate scene, what is? William joined us. He had developed the idea that his mother had a crush on me. Oh, I wonder what gave him that idea. And being full of mischief, put this to her. The princess told him not to be so silly, and then he suddenly tugged at her towel so it dropped to the floor, leaving the wife of the heir to the throne naked before me. Diana slowly picked up the towel, covering herself again, and promptly burst out laughing. Classy. Are you hearing things in this book that you have never heard before? I am, and I cannot imagine. I cannot imagine now. Now, this may be libelous, so I'm not saying that this is fact, but it seems, Ken Wharfe, that was a very intimate scene. And I can't understand that if Diana was standing in the kitchen in a towel, why you didn't actually leave the room and say, well, Mum, I will leave the room until you're suitably attired and then I will come back to my post. Because it's so unprofessional. And how do you expect us to believe that that was innocent? I mean, come on. I mean, leave in the comments down below what you think. But be careful. Don't accuse. Just say it's, because, Ken Wharfe could sue us all. So I am believing what you are saying in your book, Ken. I'm just saying that it raises, certain suspicions. And can you blame us? But I'm sure everything you say in your book is 100% true. Now, they went on this holiday to Florida and to Disneyland, took the boys to Disneyland. And this is where the rot was really starting to set in between her and Ken Wharfe, because she wasn't being really honest with him. There was all these incidents where the paparazzi turned up and he was starting to suspect that she was actually tipping off the paparazzi. Now, he suspected that she actually tipped off Richard Kay of the Daily Mail when they were heading off to Florida, and he actually found out that she did. Now, he was quite dismayed by this because it interfered with his security sort of efforts on her behalf and on behalf of the boys. The fact that she was tipping off, backgrounding behind his back, it upset him. And they went on to the Bahamas, and the bodyguards and security had a rather posh house down the beach from her house. And she got rather peeved because the boys wanted to run down to the security's house and where Ken Wharfe was and have fun with him. And Diana wanted to spend time with the boys on her holiday, and Ken Wharfe was getting increasingly frustrated because she was taking such great efforts to be photographed on the beach. She would put on some stunning bathers and walk up and down the beach in front of the paparazzi trying to get a shot taken, whereupon Ken Wharfe would go out on, on a speedboat or on a motor, like a, what do you call them? Jet skis, and he would talk to the waiting paparazzi in the speedboats and try and get rid of them. And he was getting increasingly frustrated and upset by the fact that by her behaviour, it was interfering with the boys' holiday. So, look, it was not going well. By the end of the holiday, storm clouds were gathering, both literally and metaphorically. The princess had not had a good time and she was at odds with everyone. It was clear that she was finding the pressure arising from her separation and her new life difficult to cope with, even on holiday with friends. She was behaving increasingly erratically, and before we left for the flight back to Britain, she made one last concerted effort to be photographed, which for security reasons I thwarted, and she was not pleased. And then there was this incident at a gym back in the UK. Do you remember those paparazzi photographs of her in the gym and also even inside the gym? And there was a huge court case. There was a settlement before it actually went to court. She was furious with Ken Wharfe because Ken Wharfe wanted to give evidence. I'm not sure what evidence, whether it was going to negatively impact on her, but she certainly possibly thought that it was going to. And anyway, they were due to go and watch William at this soccer match after they got back to the UK. By this stage, Ken Wharfe and her were barely talking. It was just, bare bones sort of communication, a lot of hostility between them. And it was the final straw when she turned up at this soccer match for William, and she was really harsh with William and embarrassed him in front of his friends. And Ken Wharfe just thought that she was absolutely out of line. Just hated it and just thought, and then she sped on the way home and she sort of did this peevish thing of pulling in and wanting to go shopping, but she parked on a double yellow line. And I'll tell you this story in his own words. An embarrassing silence reigned as we drove along Kensington High Street, approaching Kensington Palace. Suddenly, Diana veered over to the side of the road and slammed on the brakes, declaring that she wanted to go shopping for CDs. The only problem was that she'd decided to park on a double yellow line. She opened her door and started to get out, and I broke the silence. "Ma'am, you're illegally parked. You can't park here. You know that's against the law." She turned and looked daggers at me. "You're a policeman, aren't you? Sort it out." Ooh, he saw red. So she drove back to the palace, and then she pulled up at Kensington Palace, and before he had a chance to join her, she jumped out of the car, declared over her shoulder that she's going shopping, and ran back up the high street. And his reaction was this: "That is it," I said out loud. And he composed his letter of resignation in his head and began to evaluate his options. Yet even the prospect of leaving royal protection and returning to uniform did not worry me. Even the antics of the princess over the last few weeks, he'd honestly thought that anything would be better than this ridiculous existence. Egos aside, I knew that professionally I had no option. She'd made my job impossible, and consequently, she was jeopardizing her own security. So once they got back to the apartment, he calmly informed her, "Ma'am, I've decided to resign as your personal protection officer. I will be speaking to Colin this afternoon, and I'll be asking to be switched to other duties as soon as possible." My voice sounded curiously cold and remote to me, but the princess said nothing. She stepped out of the car and walked head bowed into Kensington Palace, and she did not look back. Now, his superiors actually tried to talk him out of it. Many people tried to talk him out of it. He had to do this humiliating departure thing about 3 weeks later, where Diana always gave departing staff a carriage clock, inscribed by her, and he had to go through that whole humiliating exercise. She was very standoffish. It was really awkward. It was very cold between them. And he says that a Daily Mail reporter on December 1993 wrote a rather flattering piece assessing the impact of my departure upon the princess. Knowing Diana's almost obsessive daily dependence on that newspaper, he had no doubt that she would have actually read it. The departure of her personal bodyguard, Detective Inspector Ken Wharfe, was cataclysmic because he was loyal, shrewd, respectful, good fun, and above all, common sense. He, more than anybody, kept her in touch with reality and truth. And of course, we know, the very sad ending. As he says, only 8 weeks of Mohammed Fayed being in charge of her security, and she was actually dead. So what a tragic story. And doesn't this book give you insights into, a background that I didn't know? And it really correlates with Wendy Berry's Housekeeper's Diary. It really does, because that gradual hostility, it happened with nearly all her staff. That gradual coldness, hostility, but that story about the shirtless and the towel around her while she's ironing, that genuinely shocked me. I don't know about you, but I was just mouth dropped open at that stage. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed those very juicy snippets from Diana Closely Guarded Secret, and I will be back with a new surprise, another juicy book next Friday evening. Thank you so much for joining me. If you enjoy this video and the book and everything, could you share it with a few buddies and like and subscribe, because these book readings aren't getting great views, and I would appreciate it if you could sort of let people know about them, because I do enjoy doing them very, very much. Okay, I'll see you next week. Bye.